If the PMBOK Guide 8th edition feels complex, overwhelming, or disconnected, this video is exactly what you need. In this single session, I will help you see the entire PMBOK 8 processes as one clear, connected picture. This video is designed to make all the project management processes in PMBOK 8 easy to understand and practical to use, and it can confidently serve as your main reference until PMBOK 9 is released. If you are preparing for any project management certification exam, this video will help you truly understand all 40 processes in PMBOK 8, not just memorize their names. You'll see how the processes connect, why they exist, and how they actually work together in real projects, exactly the kind of understanding exams like the PMP focus on. And here is my strong recommendation. If you are preparing for an exam like PMP, watch this video at least twice. Watch it before you start your detailed exam preparation to build a solid foundation, then watch it again shortly before your exam to refresh the full picture and lock everything in. I spent a huge amount of time and effort creating this video to make it as clear, structured, and exam relevant as possible. So if you find value in it, don't just like the video, please also share it. Send it to your friends, colleagues, and anyone interested in project management. And if you truly want to help others, please share this video on platforms like Reddit, LinkedIn, or similar communities. Many people there are struggling to make sense of PMBOK 8. By sharing this video, you can help them save time, reduce confusion, and study more effectively. Now, let's start simplifying PMBOK 8, step by step, process by process. If you are new here, I am Sabri, the founder of KSPM Academy and Lando Management Academy. I teach the best-selling online PMP Exam Prep course through which thousands of students have successfully passed their exams. Okay, let's start this video by talking about what a project is. What is a project? When we ask what is a project, the easiest way to understand it is by looking at its two key characteristics. If an activity has these two, then congratulations, we are dealing with a project. First, a project is temporary. Temporary does not mean short. It means it has a clear start and a clear finish. Every project begins at some point and ends when its objective is achieved. It doesn't matter whether the project takes 2 weeks or 5 years, it will always finish. That's the nature of projects. Second, a project creates something unique. The outcome might be a product, a service, or a result, but it is not something we produce over and over again in the same way. Building a house, developing a website, or creating a mobile app are all projects because the outcome is one of a kind in some way. Now, this is where students often get confused, so let's make it very clear. Repetitive, ongoing work is not a project, it is an operation. If you are producing the same product every day on an assembly line or baking the same bread every morning in a bakery, that work does not end and the output is not unique. That's why it's called operations, not a project. So, when we put everything together, a project is something we do for a limited time in order to create a unique product, service, or result. If it ends and it's unique, welcome to the world of projects. In project management, processes play a fundamental role in how work is planned, executed, and controlled. So, to truly understand project management, we first need to clearly understand what a process is. A process is simply a series of steps we follow to reach a result. That definition actually fits project management perfectly. In our world, that result has a name. We call it the output. Every process exists for main reason, to create its outputs. Now, a process doesn't produce outputs by itself. To create those outputs, we perform certain actions. In project management, these actions are called tools and techniques. Think of them as how we do the work. This includes methods, techniques, meetings, analyses, software, and so on. But here is the key point. To use those tools and techniques, we need something to start with. That something is called inputs. Inputs are the information, documents, or data we need before we can do any work. So, the easiest way to remember all this is to imagine a machine. Inputs go into the machine, we apply tools and techniques, and outputs come out. Simple. Another important idea is that processes are connected. The output of one process often becomes the input to another process. Nothing works in isolation. To make sense of all these processes, we can group them in two different ways. First, we group processes based on what part of the project they are related to. This gives us the 7 performance domains: governance, scope, schedule, finance, stakeholders, resources, and risk. So, for example, we have scope management processes like define scope or develop scope structure, or schedule management processes like plan schedule management, develop schedule, and so on. Second, we can group them based on when they are performed during the project lifecycle. This gives us the 5 focus areas: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. I just said that these 5 groups are based on when the processes are performed during the project lifecycle. So, what is the project lifecycle then? Well, a project lifecycle is the series of phases that a project goes through from start to finish. For example, if it's a construction project, the life cycle may include phases such as design, construction, and handover. Or if it's a software project, then it may include phases such as requirements, development, testing, and deployment. Here, please note that the project lifecycle and focus areas are not the same. The project lifecycle describes the phases of the work itself, while focus areas describe how project management activities are applied across those phases. This is the difference between these two terms. Okay, now that we understand how processes are grouped, we can start walking through them step by step. But before doing that, there is one more important point I want to clarify. When you open the PMBOK guide and start reading it, you will notice that the processes are presented by performance domains. In other words, the governance domain processes come first, then scope, then schedule, and so on. Each domain covered one by one. However, real projects don't work like this. In real life, processes from different domains overlap, interact, and happen in a very different order. So, in this video, instead of following the book's domain-based structure, I will explain the processes in the order they typically occur in real projects. The goal is to help you understand not just the theory, but how these processes actually flow and work together in practice. So, let's start from the very beginning. No matter what kind of project we are working on, we always begin with the initiating focus area. It doesn't matter whether this is a construction project, a software development project, or any other type of project, the starting point is always initiating. In the PMBOK Guide 8th edition, we have two initiating processes, and initiate project or phase is one of them. Now, as you can see, I will represent each process visually like this. I will also use symbols to show which performance domain each process belongs to. To make this clear, I've created a legend that explains which symbol represents which domain. Since we have 7 performance domains in PMBOK 8, we have 7 symbols here. On top of that, I will use different colors for each performance domain. For example, I will use green for processes related to the governance performance domain, blue for finance, and so on. This visual approach will help us clearly see how different performance domains are connected as we walk through the processes. Now, what happens in the initiate project or phase process? Simply put, this is where the project is officially authorized. In other words, we are telling the organization, yes, we are starting a new project. At this point, we define the project's purpose and establish high level information. For example, we clarify why the project exists, estimate the budget at a high level, identify major risks, and outline key objectives. All this information is typically documented in a document named the project charter. In adaptive environments, it is often a short document and does not need to be formal. In predictive environments, however, the charter is usually a formal document that may be several pages long. Once the project charter is created and approved, we can officially say that the project has started. At the same time, before moving into other project management activities, we also need to start identifying stakeholders. A stakeholder is someone who is affecting or who is affected by our project, either in positive or negative way. Identifying stakeholders at the very beginning is critical because stakeholders can influence almost every part of the project. The earlier we understand who they are and how they may impact the project, the better our planning will be. For this reason, we began identifying stakeholders almost in parallel with defining the project's high level information. These two processes usually move forward together until the project charter is approved. Even after approval, we continue identifying stakeholders as new stakeholders may become visible. As we identify stakeholders, we might need to update certain information in the project charter, and sometimes details in the charter lead us to discover new stakeholders. To show this close two-way relationship, I will represent it with a two-headed blue arrow like this. Okay, once the project charter is created and approved, the next big question becomes, how are we going to achieve these project goals? At the same time, we also want to make sure we are meeting stakeholders' needs and expectations. To do this, we don't create one single generic plan. Instead, we plan the project in pieces. In other words, we create a plan for managing scope, a separate plan for resources, and another one for schedule, and so on. However, before jumping into all these separate plans, there is one very important decision we must make first: the project lifecycle. This is because the lifecycle we choose will directly affect every single plan we create. So, for example, if this is a construction project, the lifecycle might include phases such as feasibility, planning, design, construction, and delivery, or something similar. We also decide whether the project will follow a predictive, agile, or hybrid lifecycle. Based on this decision, we then plan the schedule, budget, resources, risks, and all other aspects of the project. All of this work is carried out within a governance process called Integrate and Align Project Plans. Once the life cycle is clear, we can start developing the individual plans, and we usually begin with planning the project scope. Scope is about clearly defining two things: the product we will deliver at the end of the project and the work required to create that product. For example, if we are constructing a building, scope includes details such as how many doors and windows the building will have, their types, sizes, and specifications. It also includes how these doors and windows will be installed. All of this together is what we call scope. We start with scope planning for a very simple reason. We cannot plan anything else without first knowing what we are going to produce. If we don't know how many doors and windows are needed, we cannot estimate how long installation will take, how many workers will be required, or how much budget we need. In the same way, without clear scope details, we cannot properly identify risks or analyze other critical project factors. So, how do we define the scope? First, we plan how we will define it. This is called planning scope management. You can think of this as a user's manual for scope definition and control. In this manual, we decide how the scope will be defined and how it will be managed throughout the project. For example, Will we conduct stakeholder interviews to define the scope? Will we review existing documents or contracts? All of these decisions are clarified upfront so we can deliver better value to the project. Everything is then documented in a document called the Scope Management Plan. Next, we move into a process called Elicit and Analyze Requirements. This is where we collect the requirements for the project. For example, in a construction project, a requirement might be something like the foundation must support a load of 500 tons, or the exterior must include energy efficient insulation. In a software development project, our requirement could be the system must respond within 2 seconds for any user request. In simple terms, requirements are the conditions that must be met in order to achieve the project goals and satisfy stakeholder expectations, and this is the process where we identify them. While collecting these requirements, we will use the scope management plan. At the same time, as we learn more from stakeholders and gather new information, we may need to go back and update the scope management plan. To show this back and forth relationship, I will use a double-headed arrow like this. You will see this kind of relationship in many processes. It simply means that we may move between processes several times instead of following a strict one-way path. So whenever you see this symbol, please understand that I am showing such an iterative relationship. Before we continue, a quick note. If this content is helping you see project management more clearly, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I regularly share structured explanations, exam-focused insights, and practical ways to simplify complex project management topics, especially for the PMP exam. Subscribing means you won't miss future videos that build directly on what we are covering here. Okay, once we have collected the requirements, we can start defining the scope. If this is a predictive project, we will create a very detailed description of what we will produce and how we will produce it. This detailed description is called the project scope statement. So, in the project scope statement, we clearly define the project deliverables, major work components, boundaries, assumptions, and constraints. For example, in a construction project, we define details such as the type of building, number of floors, materials to be used, and what is included or excluded from the work. However, if the project is agile, we don't define the full scope in detail at the beginning. Instead, we define only what we can define at that point. The remaining details will emerge over time as the team learns more about the product, stakeholder needs, and the solution itself while the project progresses. As we start developing the project scope statement and gain more clarity, we also began another important activity, the make or buy analysis. This is carried out within a governance process called plan sourcing strategy. Here, we decide which work we will perform internally and which work we should outsource. For example, in a construction project, we may evaluate whether it makes more sense to carry out excavation work using our own equipment and team or to subcontract it. We look at factors such as cost, equipment availability, labor, and time. In a software project, this could mean deciding whether to develop certain components in-house or purchase ready-made third-party solutions. We start this process only after making some progress on the project scope statement. Do you understand the reason? This is because before we can decide what to make internally and what to outsource, we first need a clear understanding of the work itself. Once we know what needs to be done, we can then decide which parts make sense to handle in-house and which parts are better sourced from outside. As we continue planning other areas of the project, such as the schedule, finances, resources, and risks, we keep refining this analysis and making more accurate sourcing decisions. All of these decisions, including what we will make, what we will buy, and how we will manage sourcing, are documented in a plan called the sourcing strategy plan. Now, once the scope is defined, we know exactly what needs to be delivered. At this point, we can take those deliverables and break them down into smaller, more manageable pieces. This breakdown is called the work breakdown structure or WBS, and we create it in a process called develop scope structure. A WBS is a hierarchical decomposition. Think of it like taking a big box and unpacking it into smaller boxes, making the work much easier to plan, estimate, and manage. For example, in a construction project, the WBS might include major components such as the foundation, framing, electrical, and plumbing work, with each of these further broken down into detailed work packages. Okay, please pay attention here. Although we talk about define scope and develop scope structure as separate processes, in real life they often happen almost at the same time. As soon as we start writing the scope statement, we naturally began thinking about how the work will be broken down. And while developing the scope structure, we sometimes realize that something is missing or unclear, which sends us back to refine the scope statement. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that in Agile projects, we don't create a detailed scope upfront. Since there is no detailed scope, there is also nothing to break down in the traditional sense. That's why in Agile projects, we don't create a work breakdown structure. Instead, we use a product backlog. A product backlog is a living, prioritized list of features, functions, and improvements that the team may deliver. It starts at a very high level and gradually becomes more detailed as the project moves forward and the team learns more about the customer's needs. Finally, as we define the scope, develop the scope structure, or elicit and analyze requirements, we may need to go back to earlier processes. For example, while defining the scope, we might realize that changes are needed in the scope management plan, which means revisiting the plan scope management process. This kind of back and forth can continue even after planning is completed and project work has already started. In this video, I will use this symbol to represent that type of relationship. If there are only two processes within the same performance domain, the two-headed blue arrows are enough to show this interaction. However, whenever there are more than two related processes, I will use this symbol in this video to make that relationship clear. Alright, now that we clearly understand what we are going to produce and how we are going to produce it, the next logical step is to figure out how long all of this work will take. Once we do that, we can determine the overall duration of the project. Just like we did for scope, we don't jump straight into creating the schedule. First, we create the user's manual for the schedule domain. This is called the schedule management plan. In this plan, we define how the schedule will be developed and managed. For example, we decide which techniques we will use to estimate durations, how we will establish schedule baselines, how progress will be monitored, and how changes to schedule will be handled. So yes, this document is basically the user's manual for scheduling, and we create it in the plan schedule management process. Now, let me ask you a question. Can we develop a schedule just by knowing the scope? Think about it for a moment. The answer is no, we can't. Let's use a simple example. Imagine we are painting the exterior of a building. If 5 painters can finish the job in 20 days, then with 10 painters, we might be able to complete it in about 10 days. So clearly, the number of workers affects the duration. But that's not the whole story. If we only have 5 paintbrushes, then no matter how many painters we assign, only 5 of them can work at the same time. So equipment availability also directly affects the schedule. In project management terms, workers are human resources while tools, equipment, and materials are physical resources. That means to develop a realistic schedule, we must first identify and analyze our resources. This includes not only how many people we have, but also their skills, availability, and the equipment or machinery required to do the work. On top of that, we also need to consider constraints such as budget limits, workspace capacity, and dependencies between resources. As you can see, project management activities never happen in isolation. Everything is connected and many activities move forward at the same time. To handle this complexity, we need a way to bring everything together and keep it aligned. This is exactly the purpose of the integrate and align project plans process. In this process, we create the project management plan, which is a single integrated document that brings together all the individual management plans from different performance domains. You can think of it as a divider file that systematically organizes all the user manuals in one place. Now, after planning how we will develop the schedule and understanding our resource situation, we can finally determine how long the project will take. This is done in the develop schedule process. Here, we define the activities, sequence them, estimate their durations, run scheduling calculations, and ultimately arrive at the total project duration. One last important point: this is not a one-time activity. Scheduling is highly iterative. I mean, we may run the initial calculations and realize the schedule is too long or doesn't meet expectations. In that case, we look for optimization options. For example, we might perform some activities in parallel instead of strictly one after another, or we may decide to add more resources where possible. We repeat this cycle until we reach a schedule that is realistic, achievable, and aligned with project constraints. These adjustments don't happen just once. We repeat them several times until everyone agrees on a realistic and achievable schedule. Once the schedule is reviewed and accepted by key stakeholders, it becomes the schedule baseline. From that point on, this baseline is what we use to measure and control schedule performance. Now, since understanding resources is essential for developing the schedule, let's shift our focus to the resources domain. As I mentioned earlier, resources include both human resources and physical resources. As you probably expect by now, we start by creating the user's manual for this domain. This document is called the Resource Management Plan. In this plan, we define how roles and responsibilities will be assigned. For example, if the organization already has predefined roles, we decide whether we will use those roles as they are or whether the project requires new project-specific roles. If new roles are needed, we explain how they will be defined. We also describe how materials and equipment will be identified, how resource usage will be optimized, and how we will ensure that resources are allocated efficiently throughout the project. Once the resource management plan is in place, we can start estimating the resources needed for project activities in the estimate resources process. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we usually begin with initial resource estimates and then develop the schedule based on those estimates. However, to meet deadlines or key milestones, we may need to adjust resource allocation. This could mean increasing certain resources, reducing others, or replacing some resources with alternatives available elsewhere in the organization. In practice, develop, schedule, and estimate resources are carried out almost at the same time. We move back and forth between these two processes until we reach an optimal balance. The final outcome must be realistic and approved by key stakeholders to ensure it aligns with project objectives. Next, we move into financial planning. At this point, we estimate our costs, develop the budget, and decide how the project will be funded. We are able to do this because we already know what we will produce, how we will produce it, and which resources we will need and for how long. But just like with other domains, cost planning is not isolated. Based on our cost findings, we may need to revisit other plans. For example, if the budget we calculated exceeds what was approved in the project charter, we might look for most cost-effective resources, or we may decide to modify the design to reduce costs, which could require changes to the project scope. We continue making these adjustments until we arrive at a budget that is accepted by key stakeholders. As usual, we began this domain by creating its user manual, the Financial Management Plan. We create this plan in the Plan Financial Management process. Here, we define how project finances will be managed. For example, we explain how cost estimates will be prepared, what cost control mechanisms will be used, who has authority over financial approvals, and how financial performance will be monitored. After the plan is ready, we move on to the estimate costs process. Here, we calculate the cost of each component of the project. This includes materials, labor, equipment, transportation, and any other expenses required to deliver the project. Finally, once we have a complete picture of all costs, we can finalize the budget in the develop budget process. This is where we aggregate all estimated costs and determine how the funds will be distributed over time. For example, if the project requires spending $100,000 this month and $200,000 next month based on the schedule, we create a detailed budget that clearly shows when and how the money will be spent throughout the project lifecycle. Before we continue, if you'd like to get a free PDF document that covers all the topics explained in this video, simply write for the processes in the comments below. I'll personally share the download link with you so you can keep it as a reference while studying or reviewing for your exam. Okay, at the beginning of this video, we learned that at the very beginning of the project, we must identify the stakeholders known at that point as early as possible. A stakeholder is anyone who can affect the project, be affected by it, or considers themselves affected by it. This can be the project sponsor, the customer, the project manager, the project management team, a regulatory authority, or even a nearby community impacted by the project's outcome. Now, why is this so important? Because stakeholders can influence the project in many different ways, sometimes in ways we don't expect at all. I mean, if we miss a stakeholder early on, that person or group can easily turn into a major risk or a serious obstacle later in the project. For example, imagine a local authority that we didn't identify at the beginning. Later on, they may require additional permits or impose restrictions which can delay the project, increase costs, or force us to make major changes to the project scope. Now, once these stakeholders are identified, the next step is to plan how we will engage them. That is, we decide how to communicate with them, involve them, and manage their expectations throughout the project. We do this in a process called planned stakeholder engagement. In this process, we analyze and categorize stakeholders based on their needs, interests, influence, and expectations. Then, based on this analysis, we define strategies for how each stakeholder or stakeholder group should be involved in the project. Communication plays a central role in stakeholder engagement because, in most cases, engaging stakeholders means communicating with them effectively. For this reason, while planning stakeholder engagement, we also need to plan project communications. This includes deciding what information will be shared and when it will be shared, who will receive it, and which communication methods and technologies will be used to ensure the information is delivered clearly and efficiently. Now, let's talk about risk, which is the last critical domain we need to consider during planning. I intentionally left the risk performance domain for last, not because it is less important, but because risks can originate from almost any other area of the project: scope, schedule, cost, resources, and more. That said, this does not mean we should wait until everything else is planned before identifying risks. Yes, Risks can arise from other aspects of the project, but those same aspects can also be affected by the risks we identify. For example, to prevent a risk from turning into an actual issue, we may need to adjust the schedule, use alternative resources, or take preventive actions. For this reason, it is best to start identifying risks as early as possible, continue doing so alongside planning other areas, and make sure all visible risks are captured before finalizing the schedule and budget. We cannot realistically finalize the schedule or budget without considering risks because we need to add extra time and cost to account for potential risk impacts. So, as you might expect by now, we began the risk domain by planning how we will manage risks. This is done in the plan risk management process. Once again, this process acts like a user's manual. Here, we define how risks will be identified, analyzed, responded to, and monitored throughout the project lifecycle. Next comes the identify risks process. This is where we identify potential risks that could affect the project. As I mentioned earlier, at this point, we capture all the risks that are visible and apparent to us. Of course, this doesn't mean we will identify every single risk right at the beginning. Some risks only emerge later in the project lifecycle. For example, a new regulation may be introduced halfway through the project, or a key supplier may suddenly face financial problems. When situations like these arise, new risks appear and they can directly affect project objectives. When that happens, we may need to reassess our plans and make adjustments. Once we have identified the risks that are apparent at that moment, the next step is to analyze them. In these risk analysis processes, we try to understand how each risk could impact the project if it occurs. Not every identified risk will actually happen, but the challenge is that we don't know in advance which ones will. However, we can estimate the likelihood and potential impact of risks to a certain extent, which helps us prepare more effectively. After analyzing the risks, we then move on to planning our risk responses. Here, we decide how we will deal with each risk. For some risks, we may take proactive actions to prevent them from occurring. For others, we may need to escalate them to senior management. In some cases, we may accept the risk and prepare a response plan if it happens. All of these decisions are captured as part of our risk response strategies. So, these are the key planning processes you need to know for the exam. Now, let's bring everything together. All the management plans we created in the planning focus area, the project lifecycle information we decided on, and the baselines we established are consolidated into one central document, the project management plan. A baseline is simply the approved version of a plan. For example, once the project schedule is approved, it becomes the schedule baseline. Or once the cost estimates and budget are finalized and approved, they form the cost baseline. And once the scope is defined and approved, we have the scope baseline. All of these baselines, along with the management plans, are integrated into the project management plan through the integrate and align project plans process. At this point, I want you to pay close attention to all those blue double-headed arrows. I mentioned this at the beginning of this video, but because it is so important for understanding how processes really work, it's worth repeating. Most project management processes are not isolated activities. We often carry out several processes at the same time, and a change in one process can easily require updates in another. For example, identifying a new physical resource may increase costs and introduce new risks, or changing the sequence of activities may require additional resources, which then impacts both the schedule and the budget. Also, just because we complete a process once doesn't mean we are done with it forever. We can revisit any process whenever it becomes necessary. For instance, during resource planning, we might realize that our original assumptions about resource availability were incorrect, which forces us to adjust the schedule and cost estimates. Similarly, during cost estimation, new information from stakeholders may require us to revise our earlier estimates. These kinds of relationships don't exist only between processes within the same focus area, but also between processes across different focus areas. For example, even after the schedule baseline is approved, unexpected delays or scope changes during execution may force us to revisit and adjust it. In the same way, once the project work has started, new risks may emerge, requiring us to go back and update our plans. Here, you'll notice that I've shown the relationship between the initiating and planning focus areas as one-sided. The reason for this is simple. We aim to identify all stakeholders as early as possible because adding a new stakeholder later can mean additional time, cost, and complexity. In the same way, we prefer not to revise the project charter since it effectively acts as the constitution of the project. That said, this is the ideal situation. In reality, we may still need to revisit these processes from time to time. For example, in very rare cases, a customer request may require an update to the project charter. Similarly, new stakeholders can appear later due to organizational restructuring, external changes, or newly discovered project requirements. The only place where the relationship should truly be one-sided is between the closing focus area and all other focus areas. If we are in closing, it means the project work has either been completed or formally stopped. At that point, we are not going back to revise plans, baselines, or documents. The work is finished. Now, let's continue with the remaining processes. Once all the plans and baselines are consolidated into the project management plan and the plan is approved, the real work begins. This is where we move into the executing focus area. Executing processes are the processes we use to carry out the project work. For example, in a software development project, this is when coding, testing, and integration happen. In a construction project, this is when physical construction starts and resources are actively used on site. The main process where we manage this work is called Manage Project Execution. In this process, we make sure that project activities are performed according to the plan, resources are used efficiently, and any approved changes are properly implemented. While executing the work, we are also continuously monitoring and controlling project performance. This means we track actual performance and compare it with what was planned in the project management plan. As a result, we generate performance reports that show where the project stands. These reports help key stakeholders understand the current status of the project and highlight areas that may need attention to keep the project on track. Based on this performance information, we may decide that changes are necessary to achieve the project objectives. The process where we evaluate and handle these changes is called assess and implement changes. For example, if the process is falling behind schedule, we may decide to add more resources or revise the timeline. If a stakeholder requests a scope change, we first assess its impact on cost, schedule, and other areas before deciding whether to approve it. Once a change is approved, it is implemented through the Manage Project Execution process. As we carry out these activities and many others across the project, we naturally gain valuable lessons along the way. The knowledge we gain from these experiences is managed in a process called Manage Project Knowledge. For example, if you notice that frequent scope changes are causing disruptions, we may learn that stronger stakeholder engagement or clearer requirements definition is needed. These insights are documented in the Lessons Learned Register so that not only the current project but also future projects can benefit from this knowledge. While executing the project, we also focus on preventing quality problems before they happen. This is known as quality assurance, and in the PMBOK Guide 8th edition, managing quality assurance is considered a governance process. For example, We may verify whether the team is following established procedures or check whether the working environment meets the required standards. Okay, here it's important to understand that executing and monitoring and controlling are tightly linked. As we manage and perform the project work, we are also continuously tracking progress and performance. This close relationship is why I represent the connection between these two focus areas with a double-headed arrow like this. To execute the project, the first thing we need to do is acquire the necessary resources. For example, in a software development project, this may mean bringing together developers, testers, and designers, as well as securing the required tools, software, licenses, and infrastructure. As project managers, we work closely with the team and other stakeholders to make sure the right people, tools, and support are available at the right time so the work can begin and continue smoothly without unnecessary delays. Now, here is an important note. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that we start executing activities after the project management plan is approved. In general, this is true. However, there is a practical exception. In real projects, the project management team is often involved earlier. This is because they support the project manager during planning by helping develop management plans and the overall project management plan. So, even though execution officially starts after plan approval, acquiring some key team members earlier is both common and necessary to ensure effective planning. After acquiring resources, the next step is to lead the team. This includes motivating team members, resolving conflicts, providing clear direction, and creating an environment where collaboration can happen effectively. For example, the project manager ensures that the team is working in line with the schedule and follows safety rules or organizational standards. This may involve running daily meetings, making sure team members have the tools and materials they need, and removing obstacles that could slow down the work. Even though this process is called lead the team, it's not just about leadership in the inspirational sense. It also includes essential management activities. These involve coordinating daily work, ensuring that agreed processes are followed, and continuously monitoring team performance to keep the project on track. We also carry out team development activities here. For example, the team may take part in training sessions, mentoring, hands on drills, or collaborative problem solving activities that improve skills and strengthen teamwork. At the same time, as we acquire resources and lead the team, we must also monitor and control resourcing. This means checking how resources are being used and whether they are being used efficiently. We look at both people and physical resources. For example, we may notice that one team member is overloaded while another has idle time, or that certain materials are being wasted or running low. By identifying these issues early, we can take corrective actions and ensure resources are used in the best possible way. As we execute the project, we gradually complete parts of the final product. Each time a component is completed, we need to obtain formal acceptance from the customer or sponsor to confirm that the work meets the agreed requirements. This is done in the validate scope process. In this process, the customer or sponsor reviews the completed components and formally approves them. For example, in a construction project, once a section such as the foundation or electrical wiring is completed, the customer may inspect it and give formal approval before the project moves on to the next phase. This step-by-step validation helps ensure that what we deliver matches expectations. However, before we ask the customer to validate completed components, we must first make sure those components meet quality standards. This is where quality control comes in. Quality control activities are performed in a monitoring and controlling process called monitor and control scope. The deliverables that pass quality inspections in this process are called verified deliverables. Here, please note that although the terms Quality assurance and quality control are often mentioned together in real life. They are not the same. Quality assurance is about preventing problems, while quality control is about detecting and fixing problems after they occur. So, for example, in a construction project, quality assurance would involve making sure that workers follow approved construction procedures and standards, while quality control would involve inspecting the completed work to identify and correct any defects. In monitor and control scope, we don't just check quality, we also control the scope itself. We ask questions like, has anything changed in the scope? Is the work being performed aligned with what was defined during planning? The goal is to make sure there is no deviation from the agreed scope. For example, if the scope requires steel doors, we verify that steel doors are actually installed and not replaced with a different material. As project execution continues, we also need to carry out the risk responses we planned earlier. For instance, if we identified the risk of key team members becoming unavailable and decided that cross training would be the response, then we must actually implement those cross training sessions. This is done in the implement risk responses process, where we make sure planned risk actions are executed as intended. At the same time, we continue to monitor risks. Some risks may no longer be relevant, new risks may emerge, or the impact of existing risks may change. When this happens, we update the risk register, reassess risk responses, or develop new response strategies to keep the project on track. This ongoing monitoring ensures that risks are actively managed throughout the project lifecycle. Finally, remember that during planning, we created plans for how we would engage stakeholders. Now, during execution, we must put those plans into action. The process dedicated to this is called Manage Stakeholder Engagement. In this process, we work to meet stakeholder needs and expectations by communicating regularly, sharing updates, addressing concerns, and involving them in key decisions when appropriate. By doing this, we encourage positive stakeholder contributions and reduce resistance that could otherwise slow the project down. Managing communications effectively is also a critical part of managing project work. Clear, timely communication helps keep everyone aligned, manages expectations, and reduces the risk of misunderstandings. For example, regular status updates, progress reports, and stakeholder meetings allow everyone to stay informed about project progress, risks, and changes. When communication is poor, confusion increases, decisions are delayed, and conflicts can arise, all of which can negatively affect the success of the project. As you might expect, there are monitoring and controlling processes dedicated to both stakeholder engagement and communications. In these processes, we measure actual stakeholder engagement levels and compare them with the expected levels we define during planning. At the same time, we evaluate whether our communications are effective and whether they meet stakeholder needs and expectations. If something isn't working as planned, we adjust our approach accordingly. Now, we are done with the executing processes, but we still have two important monitoring and controlling processes to cover. The first one is monitor and control schedule. The main goal here is to keep the project schedule realistic and achievable throughout the project. We regularly check whether we are ahead of schedule or falling behind. If we identify delays, especially on critical activities, we take corrective actions. For example, we might add resources, resequence activities, or apply schedule compression techniques to bring the project back on track. The last monitoring and controlling process we'll talk about is monitor and control finances. As the name suggests, this is where we control the project's financial performance. We verify whether our cost estimates are still valid and make sure the project stays within the approved budget. For example, if we originally estimated a resource to cost $10,000 but it actually costs $15,000, we must update the budget and possibly look for cost savings in other areas. Similarly, if we planned to spend $100,000 this month but ended up spending $150,000, we need to understand why and take steps to prevent cash flow problems in the future. All of these actions help maintain the project's financial stability. Here, it is important to understand that executing and monitoring and controlling activities happen at the same time. Project management is not a step by step checklist where we finish one process and then move on to the next. We don't say things like, now that risk responses are implemented, let's start monitoring risks, or we've finished leading the team, so now we can start controlling resources. That's simply not how real projects work. These processes are interconnected and constantly overlapping. While we are implementing risk responses, we are also monitoring risks to see if those responses are effective. And while we are leading the team, we are simultaneously monitoring resource usage to ensure everything is being used efficiently and responsibly. In addition to all of this, we should always be ready to go back to the planning processes and adjust our plans when something changes. For example, if we realize that a key resource is no longer available, we may need to update the resource management plan and revise the schedule. Or if ongoing risk monitoring reveals a new risk we hadn't identified before, we may need to update the risk register and define new risk response strategies. This kind of dynamic, iterative approach applies to all project management processes. The second important point to understand is that how we apply these processes depends on the project itself, the organization, and the customer. If the organization has strict rules about how certain processes must be performed, then we are expected to follow those rules. However, if the organization allows flexibility, which is always better, we can tailor the processes to better suit the project's needs. This might mean adjusting how we manage risks, engage stakeholders, allocate resources, or monitor progress based on what actually adds value to the project. And finally, there is one critical idea you should always keep in mind. Every process we apply must create value. This is the entire purpose of project management. Whether we are initiating, planning, executing, or monitoring, everything we do should help move the project forward in a meaningful way. If a process, tool, or document does not add value, then it should be adapted or even removed. Staying focused on value ensures that our efforts contribute to the best possible outcome for the customer, the organization, and the project team. Okay, once all project work is completed, the project may end in different ways. Sometimes the project is successfully completed as planned. In other cases, the results may not fully meet the original goals, or the project may be terminated early for various reasons. No matter how the project ends, we must formally close it. This is done in the close project or phase process. In this process, we confirm that all deliverables are completed and accepted, close out any remaining contracts, document lessons learned, and release project resources. We also prepare closure reports and obtain all necessary approvals. Proper closure is important because it allows us to reflect on what went well and what didn't, and it provides valuable insights for future projects. So, this brings us to the end of this video. You now have the big picture of PMBOK Guide 8th edition, how the processes work, how they connect, and how they come together across the entire project lifecycle. If you are preparing for a project management certification exam like PMP, remember this. Understanding always beats memorization. And this video was designed to give you exactly that clarity, structure, and confidence. I strongly recommend watching it more than once. Once at the beginning of your preparation to build a solid foundation, and once again close to your exam date to refresh everything and lock it in. If you want a free PDF guide that includes everything covered in this video, just comment for the processes below. I'll send you the download link so you can use it as a handy reference while studying or doing your final exam review. If you found this video valuable, please don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with your friends, colleagues, and anyone interested in project management. And if you really want to make an impact, share it on platforms like Reddit, LinkedIn, or similar communities. Many people there are struggling to make sense of PMBOK 8, and this video can truly help them. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Keep learning, keep improving, and as always, focus on creating value.